Right, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this webinar about the deprivation of liberty safeguards, particularly looking at the application and authorisation processes, should I say. So the webinar is the third and final one in a series that's been led by the National Care Forum as a partner in the Care Provider Alliance and funded by Skills for Care. And the webinars have been exploring and revisiting and hopefully helping you to refresh your knowledge and practice around DoLS in the context of the Mental Capacity Act, human rights, and of course the indefinite postponement of the liberty protection safeguards that were intended to replace DoLS. So my name is Toby Williamson, and probably many of you will already recognise me because I've chaired and facilitated the two previous webinars, and I'll be doing the same again this afternoon. But I'll be doing that in conjunction with Liz Jones, who's Policy Director at the National Care Forum. Also going to be moderating and monitoring the questions, but I'll hand over to Liz to say some words of welcome. Over to you, Liz.
Oh, thank you, Toby. Thank you for doing a cracking job of chairing all of these webinars. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for taking the time out to join us. And if this is the first of the webinars you've managed to get along to, hopefully you'll find it will answer a number of your questions and just help you think about your practice and how you're approaching navigating the whole system, really, the deprivation of liberty system. It's fantastic that we have got so many people who've come along over the last couple of months. And I guess from the point of view of the National Care Forum and the Care Provider Alliance, we were working very closely together back in the day when liberty protection safeguards looked like it was definitely coming our way. And as part of that work, we were very keen to make sure that support for the adult social care provider sector was factored in to the preparation and the implementation. And now that it's been put on pause for however long, we thought it would be very helpful to just kind of reinvigorate our thinking and our familiarity and understanding of deprivation of liberty safeguards and the Mental Capacity Act, and think about some practical things to help not just our members, but the whole of the adult social care provider sector in just checking that, you know, they're up to date with our understanding, we are using the best practice, and that we understand how it all works. We're familiar with the processes for application and authorisation, and we're doing what we can to support our teams who are on the front line navigating this. So huge thanks to Toby and to our speakers and panelists, and to you for coming along. And we have a Q&A function that Toby's mentioned, where we can take your questions and try and answer them as best we can. So do pop your questions in the Q&A as they're occurring to you, and we will keep an eye on them. And if there's anything we can't answer immediately, we will endeavour to work it out afterwards. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Liz. Yeah, so some of you will have already heard this, but just so you know who I am, I've been asked by the National Care Forum to help support these webinars as well as chair them. I'm an independent health and social care consultant, but many years ago I worked in community-based mental health services well before DoLS and the Mental Capacity Act ever came into existence. And then I subsequently worked for quite a long time at a national social research and development charity called the Mental Health Foundation. And whilst I was there, I led or co-chaired the Making Decisions Alliance, which campaigned successfully in support of the Mental Capacity Act. So you can partly thank me for what you're faced with today. But we didn't campaign so vigorously for DoLS, I have to add, and I certainly don't confess to be an expert on DoLS. We've got the experts on our panel today. So that's my background, really. And as I say, the session, as Liz has said, the session is focused very much on application and authorisation processes around DoLS, very much in the context of the difficulties that many of you will have experienced, I expect, around local authorities being very slow in processing DoLS applications and the implications that has for you and the people who are using your services. If you want to watch the two previous webinars, the first one was an overview of DoLS in the context of the MCA and human rights. And the second one looked at ways of possibly avoiding or preventing a deprivation of liberty from occurring in the first place. Both of the webinars and the resources that were and presentations that were form part of them are available on the Care Provider Alliance website. So please do have a look at them. The webinar today, as the previous one, we're trying to run as a more interactive workshop. So we have a panel of speakers who will briefly present, but we want to try and ensure that at least half the webinar is given over to answering as many questions as you've got, including ones that people have sent in advance, as well as ones that may arise today. So as Liz said, do use the Q&A function for asking questions. If you see a question that's similar to yours, don't feel you have to write it out again, but you can do a like on it, and that gives us an indication of particular topics which are particularly important to the audience. So do keep an eye on the questions coming up. If you're happy to include your name, that's great. And when you ask a question, if you don't, that's also fine. We understand if you want to stay anonymous. You can turn on live captioning by selecting captions and subtitles in your video controls. Please feel free to use social media, tweeting about the event or Xing, whatever one's supposed to the term one's supposed to use these days. We are recording the session, as you'll have seen, and that's so we can have a recording of the webinar and the slides made available, as with the previous two webinars, on the Care Provider Alliance website. And a transcript of the recording will also be available on request. So I'm not going to carry on talking because I want to introduce our panelists. We've got people speaking from a perspective of local authority expertise, from an advocacy perspective, and I trust also that we have, just checking to see, and from a learning disability and autism perspective. Unfortunately, speaker Zoe McCallum, who is going to bring a view from a perspective of services working and supporting people with dementia, is unable to attend today. She sends her apologies, but I'm hoping that amongst the panelists, and perhaps with Liz and I contributing as well, if you do have questions which are specific to issues around people with dementia, we will still be able to find a way of answering them. So I'm now going to introduce Annie Ho, who's an independent social worker, but I've known Annie for several years. She has lots of experience of working in local authorities in adult social care, and she's going to give an overview and sort of set the scene, as it were, for the situation regarding DoLS applications, authorisations and reviews. So over to you, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you for the welcome. So I know we've got limited time. I'm going to stick to my brief presentation, but there'll be time for questions, and I'll try to bring in my own experience of DoLS. Just to say just a few words about myself. I previously worked for a very large local authority as an MCA lead. From the first day the MCA came in, so that went back a very long way. And after that, I went on to become DoLS manager of 4 different local authorities, 3 in England, and then the last one in Wales, which was very interesting to get a different perspective. So I hope to bring that perspective to you today. However, something Toby and others may not know, as an independent social worker now, I work for the court, and I've actually been involved, amongst other complex mental capacity assessments and best interest recommendations. I've actually been involved in some cases which unfortunately includes unlawful deprivation of liberty and resulting in breaches of DoLS and damages on local authority. So I'm sitting on the other side, taking local authority to court at the moment, which I hope also to bring an interesting perspective to you. I now work in an independent capacity, so I have the opportunity to do that work and also work with other providers. So let's start the presentation. Rachel, please. So first of all, Toby asked me to talk about DoLS data, which is always interesting. I put in bracket in the title, they are estimates, okay? Even the Department of Health and Social Care, when you look at NHS Digital, they always say they're estimates. The reason why I think it's really important to point that out is we really don't know still the full extent of deprivation of liberty. So here you go, you can see the estimated total for 2023 to 24. And then next, we can see there has been an 11% increase since the previous year. What is interesting about this data return is we're actually going back close to a rate of growth before COVID-19. We all know there were, pauses, there were issues, there were delays, even more delays with assessment and application, but we are going back on trend and going back on increase again. Next. 58% are urgent authorisations, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then only 145,945 fully assessed. So if you compare the number in this bullet point to the number in the first bullet point, you can see that big gap. And I know a lot of you are feeling very frustrated about it, and we can think positively what we can do. Total completed applications, you can see the numbers again, increase over the last 5 years by an average of 9% each year. It is increasing, not increasing quickly enough, but it is increasing. Not completed, you can see again a big total there. The good news, little side good news, is there's a decrease of 2% from the previous year of cases not completed. 3% of all completed and fully assessed applications were not granted. So if we move on to the bullet point, next bullet point, you can see why they were not granted. Any kind of changes in circumstances, the person regained capacity, the person maybe moved to another care home, death of the person, a quarter of them, and then 21%, nearly a quarter, assessment criteria not met, and quite commonly is mental capacity assessment criteria not met. So if I was to focus on this particular point, I'm not saying you're doing your work there to help local authorities, but one trick is for you to be really clear when you apply, you do have the confidence the person meet the criteria of those. Otherwise, we spend a lot of time of assessing, resulting in not granting an authorisation. 19%, only 19% of application for standard authorisation is completed within the statutory time frame of 21 days. That's a very small percentage. And the average length of time, shock horror, for all completed application is 144 days. It's a little bit lower than the year before, but it's still taking very long. Okay, I created this slide. I'm trying to create visually. I'm not quite sure whether it's I still got it right, almost like a traffic light. So you got the red, amber, and green. We always focus on deprivation, but I like us today to focus on liberty and safeguards. Safeguards is the green light. We're always there to safeguard vulnerable people we work with. So you look at Mental Capacity Act. Under the MCA, we have P, the person at the center. You always think about family, you always think about representation, advocacy, and best interests. So whatever the situation with the delay in DoLS authorization, the safeguards are always there. May not be the statutory safeguards of DoLS, but the safeguards of MCA are what we should all work to all the time. We got liberty in the middle, the amber one. When you have to think about restriction, always think about the least restrictive option. Think about the necessity and proportionality of bringing restriction in. Is it necessary and proportionate to the risk of harm, to the level of harm, to the likelihood of harm to the person? Always think about supporting decision-making, principle 2 of MCA, in any restriction you put in place. Deprivation, I put it as the red. It's almost like stop. We need to think now. That is obviously the big part of the application process and authorization. And what this slide I want to emphasize is there's so much more we can all do before we come to that stoplight. Just to think about application, authorization, and the deprivation today. Regular review. Under MCA, as I said, P is used as the person at the center. Under DoLS, RP is used as the relevant person at the center. Okay. So I really want you to think about compliance with MCA. So if we start with the safeguards, the green light, we should be on all the time. That is the one very positive thing we can all do, regardless of a delay of LPS and regardless of DoLS delay in assessment and authorization. Always follow all the principles of MCA, the relevant person at the center of the care and support arrangements. Always support decision making at all times. Make a list of all the decisions your residents can make. I always give this very basic tip. It's very common sense, but it makes sense. All the decisions that your residents can make, as well as a list of the different ways staff can support people to make as many decisions as possible. Back to principle 2, supporting decision making. Remember, your mental capacity assessment must be decision specific and time specific. Appropriate representation for the person. Think about that all the time. Sometimes the person has capacity. You still need to think about, do they need support of someone else? If not family and friends, it may be advocates. Review mental capacity assessment. If it is time specific, the people you work with may have fluctuating or deteriorating capacity, or even developing capacity, including consultation with all relevant other people, professionals. Always review any restrictions. When you review restrictions, you're reviewing risk assessments. We already talk about necessity and proportionality. So it's not about blanket policies. Everybody can't go out or everybody has to have a certain activity at a particular time. Always consider the least restrictive option possible for that person. Consider timely urgent authorizations, including extension and application for standard authorization. I'll give you a quick reminder of that in the next slide. So I hope the previous slide gives you all the things you should be doing all the time, okay? Applications, let's focus on DoLS now. You all know these. I'm sorry to start from basics, but we've all left DoLS a little bit to focus on our attention on LPS preparation. So it's quite helpful just to go back to basics. You are the managing authority, MA, because the person is being accommodated there for the purpose of care and support. The managing authority, what is your statutory responsibility? Your statutory responsibility is identification. Either deprivation of liberty is happening now or will be happening. And therefore, you should always seek the need to reduce the need for, you should always apply for urgent authorization by planning ahead, if possible. All those good practice tips that still stay with us. Okay, so you apply for standard authorization if you know someone is coming to you up to 28 days in advance. You can't apply too early. Application for standard authorization provides no legal authority where a deprivation of liberty is already occurring. So I'm sorry to give you that piece of good news before I move on to more positive actions. So even though you apply, it doesn't mean that you are now lawfully depriving the person of their liberty because you haven't got an authorization, a standard authorization. Urgent authorization, you can self-issue on yourself for up to 7 days. And remember, you can further extend the urgent authorization for 7 days. You can only extend it once, but unlike the standard application, once you issue the urgent authorization on yourself, you are lawfully depriving the person of their liberty if the criteria are met. Okay, a further standard authorization is a new application. I don't quite like people calling them a renewal because LPS has renewal under DoLS at the moment. It's a new authorization. Again, you can use a different form 2, to apply 28 days in advance of the current authorization expires, but always review whether it's still necessary. Okay, this slide, I want to tell you about the managing authority responsibility versus the supervisory body responsibility, i.e. versus a local authority. You can't do their job, but you can do your own job. You are responsible for identification of deprivation, as I said earlier on, issuing urgent, applying for standard. Supervisory body is responsible for considering your application, processing them, assessing and authorizing. So immediately you can see the second line isn't your responsibility. Unfortunately, it all lies with the local authority. You need to think about the acid test. I'm sure you're all aware of that. I won't go into details in order to identify deprivation of liberty and make an application. And all of those things under the acid test are irrelevant. Even if the person agrees to stay, never tries to make an attempt to leave, even though it is normal for a person with dementia and learning disability of that level to be deprived of their liberty, even though there's a good reason for them to be there, that doesn't matter. You still need to make a DoLS application. Okay. I shared with you later on about some newer tools for DoLS. My advice to you, having sit on the local authority side 4 times on the DoLS office, I always like care homes telling me why I should be prioritizing your application. So I've given you a list there. I'll just ask you to quickly read through that. I'm not going to read all of them out. So you will be helping the local authority and helping yourself by actually putting some of those highlights if those criteria are met, and basically mark in your title of your email urgent application, see text of email or something like that. That really helps a supervisory body in prioritizing. Obviously, each case is to be considered on its own merits. Don't just use my bullet point list. Think about, make it person specific. And then make sure you continue to review. So after you've sent that, if you're still waiting and waiting for the local authority to respond, continue to review. If somebody falls into any of the categories above again, update them again. You have a responsibility and you're going to help yourself by doing that. Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Annie,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. You're just running over time a little bit now.
Okay.
So could you, another 5 minutes max?
Yeah. Apologies.
Okay,
thank you for that. So, Rachel, if you put up all the points on this slide. So during an authorization, assuming you're one of the lucky ones and the local authority has granted you an authorization, do think about what you can do during the authorization. Always work with the person, work with the IMCA. I know we're going to have an RPR, we're going to have some panelists from that particular service. Think about, you continue to review and make sure everybody has the relevant information. Think about safeguarding, that's separate from DoLS, but don't forget about examples of good practice. Don't think you've got the DoLS authorization and you can just put it in the filing cupboard. Still think about DoLS and MCA. Next slide, please, Rachel. And again, if you can bring out the whole slide. Sorry, Rachel. So further applications, again, really think about reviewing the person's circumstances, keeping in good communication with the local authority. If there are any changes, I put in bold, think about Form 10, completing a part, requesting for Part A to review if the person's circumstances have changed. Okay, Rachel, if we can bring up the whole of the next slide. Now, I'm not going to talk it through with you. Do have a look. I always try to perhaps give you too much information. This slide demonstrates the cases of unlawful deprivation of liberty, and unlawful deprivation of liberty is a serious matter. And if you look about all of those cases, it is the local authority, sadly, the supervisory body, who has been taken to court. So your protection from liability is to make sure you comply with MCA. Next slide, please. Rachel. So all of those local government and ombudsman findings, again, they're really good reports. If you want to do a bit of research, the ombudsman have concluded, even when the local authority wants to put the blame on the care home, the ombudsman has turned around and say, it's not the care home's responsibility, it is you who are commissioning the care for the care home to undertake, and therefore the unlawful deprivation of liberty falls under the supervisory body responsibility. Okay, next slide, please, Rachel. Really think about the bigger picture, the duty to support the person's dignity, their rights, human rights. I know the previous presentations, webinars talk about the other legislation, so you definitely can listen to those webinars and remind yourself of the wider framework, not just MCA and DoLS. Next slide, please, Rachel. Okay. This is a really, really good guide on Social Care Institute of Excellence. They have updated it. And what I think is really helpful for care homes is to think of DoLS as only a part of your care plan. And DoLS is only a continuum of the care home's positive action. It isn't a substitute for the care plan. So I really do invite you to look at this good guide and think about how you can respond positively. I think it's a final slide. I hope it is. Okay, it is. An apology. I'm giving you all the links on the local government website of some new tools which were updated in March. A lot of you know about the previous priority tool. These are new ones which have been updated to promote good practice for local authorities and hopefully for care homes as well. I really like the local government website actually calling this particular section MCA including DoLS. Why I really like it is DoLS is not separate from MCA. I hope that's the main message of this short presentation. It's not MCA and DoLS, it's MCA including DoLS. So there's a lot more we can do about MCA. So I put my contact details there if anyone wants to contact and have further conversation about that. And apologies for going over my time.
No worries, Annie. That was great. A really comprehensive overview there of a very complicated process and a very complicated system. And it is so important to put in the context, as you say, of it's the MCA including DoLS. It's not something separate. So thank you very much. If people have questions for Annie, please post them in the Q&A and we can come back to them when we have the panel discussion. But I'm going to move on now to our next speakers. And it's Michelle Oxley and Neil Salmon, who are both independent mental capacity advocates. They work for Voiceability, the national advocacy organisation. They're just going to speak for 5 minutes roughly each, just to give their perspective on the joy of DoLS authorisations and applications and reviews. Over to you. I don't mind who goes first.
Michelle, you okay?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So I'm Michelle Oxley. I work, as Toby said, for Voiceability. I've been an advocate for 5 years now. Prior to advocacy, I worked in education. I was an early years teacher, so vastly different. But within that role, found that you are advocating for vulnerable people, young children. Depending on the area you work in, you've got sort of vulnerabilities for different reasons, and I found that advocacy was something I wanted to focus on more, and made the move to change career path. So at present, I take on the role of RPR, litigation friend, IMCA, and 1.2 representative. So work a lot with clients who are deprived of their liberty, and obviously there's lots of legislation, there's lots of sort of focus on the safeguards. Our role plays, it's an important role for people who are under a deprivation of liberty, and we're trained to support those people and make sure their views and wishes are heard. And it's something that it's about putting the person in the centre and making sure that people are listening to what they want and what their views are when they're making best interest decisions. It's something I'm very passionate about. And so I'm going to keep mine very brief. I'm going to pass to Neil and let him do his part as well.
Right. Hi, everybody. And thank you, Michelle, and everybody else so far. I've been an advocate since before the DoLS, which seems to be a long time ago, since the Bournemouth case and so on. But I became a volunteer advocate after a mental health episode, and I'd left the NHS and I needed to find my feet, and I did some voluntary work and ended up doing a volunteer advocacy role in Durham, and that's where it started about 2006. So in that time, the DoLS became a thing, and advocacy was absolutely involved in that. And, you know, it's developed over time, but it's through case law and so on. But we're involved through the Mental Capacity Act as IMCAs, Independent Mental Capacity Act advocates, from the assessment of the DoLS, the urgent authorisations. We come in as the IMCA, the 39A IMCA, to look at the person's wishes and feelings. And we write a report that goes to the supervisory body alongside the capacity assessment that the doctor does and the best interests assessment that the best interest assessor does. So we're part of that process within the 7 days of the urgent authorisations that you've heard about. After that, if a DoLS is, you know, agreed and it meets all the criteria, then a standard authorisation is put in place, and that person is entitled to a representative, an independent person, usually a family friend, family member, somebody they choose. But if they haven't got somebody, and this is the very sad thing, a lot of people out there don't have somebody to stand up for them, speak up for them, then those people, luckily under this system, have the right to an advocate. And we come in and provide that during the time throughout that standard authorization. Michelle mentioned Rule 1.2 Rep, and we also provide advocacy for people in the community who are under a DoLS, under the Court of Protection. And I don't know if we're going to look into that today. I don't think there will be time. So I'm going to keep this purely around the DoLS regime itself, which is covering hospitals and care homes. And in that area of work, we not only look to see that the care plans are being delivered in the least restrictive way and the person is happy or not, and we look to see that the person understands as best they can their rights. And if they are very unhappy there, they're objecting, or even if they're just saying, I don't want to be here, politely, we have to take that seriously, and we will help them to raise an appeal against the DoLS. So luckily, if you're in a DoLS, you have the right to free legal aid, and we will support the person to make the challenge, to find them a solicitor, we can be appointed in Sunderland. Not every authority does this, but we're allowed to be the litigation friend in appeals cases. So we go into court standing in the shoes of our client, saying to the court what our client's wishes and feelings are, challenging the local authority, who are the supervisory body in most cases. And it's a day in court. We win sometimes, we lose sometimes, we challenge on capacity, we challenge on best interests. So that's what we get up to. When a DoLS is coming to an end, there's a review, and often, you know, we've talked about there's being delays and things. We're hot on trying to make sure the delays aren't happening, and we will be on the phone to the local authority to chase things up. So we're there doing that kind of work. So that's us. Hope I haven't gone over too much time, Toby.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for that introduction, Michelle and Neil, and reminding the audience of the role of IMCAs about representing the person, but actually the point you just made, Neil, also how it may assist providers in terms of challenging where there have been terrible delays and authorisations haven't been made, because as Annie made the point, just because an application has been made doesn't mean that you're lawfully depriving someone of their liberty. It has to be authorised as well. So thank you for giving that overview, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you when we come to the questions. Okay, and our last sort of panelist, who's going to introduce themselves briefly and say what they do, is Rod Landman, who's the project director and trainer at the Association for Real Change in England, a membership organisation for providers of services to people with learning disabilities and autistic people. Over to you, Rod.
Absolutely. Thank you, Toby. Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, just to reiterate what Toby said, ARC is a membership organisation. Our USP is that we're the only national care association that's exclusively for learning disability and autism providers. And as a result of that, we do all the sort of things that you would expect us to do. For myself, my background is entirely in learning disability and autism services. When I left school, I went to work for the National Autistic Society in the town where I grew up, and I've stayed in learning disability and autism services ever since, across a whole lifetime in a variety of roles. For ARC, I deliver a lot of their training, including the whole suite on mental capacity training. And I've also been involved in the last few years on a range of projects that have been increasingly co-produced with people with learning disabilities on areas that have provoked significant challenges in relation to the Mental Capacity Act. So working on issues like mate crime, sexual exploitation, the social media grooming of people with learning disabilities for the purposes of extremism and radicalisation. And over the last 3 years, working on domestic abuse and sexual violence as well with women with learning disabilities who have experience of those issues. I'm going to focus the next 5 minutes on the most recent State of Care report that was released by CQC in October, which had in it a lengthy and detailed area of concern section on DoLS. So I'm going to talk about a few things that just caught my eye in relation to today's topic that are in that report, and they are, if I can get my PowerPoint working, there we are, 3 concerns, and maybe a fourth if I've got time. I probably won't. The issues of balancing safety and rights, providers' relationships with supervisory bodies, and whether people with learning disabilities are being overlooked by the prioritisation of cases. So I'm going to consider those in relation to a case study quite briefly. I'll introduce you to that in just a moment, but I'll go through these, as I say, in just a bit more detail and thinking in practical terms as well. So in lieu of receiving timely authorisations, which we're now very clear about, a huge backlog in authorisations that seems to be endemic, that's not ending anytime soon. So in lieu of receiving those timely authorisations, how can providers ensure they're balancing protection and rights? And just as an example, in that report, CQC talk about their own inspectors feeling stressed and confused about navigating the system whilst awaiting authorisations. So can I just imagine how it is for providers? Perhaps unsurprising that the report also found that some providers were no longer even bothering to submit applications because of the backlog. We don't recommend that as a course of action. For our own members within ARC, we say to people, keep submitting, keep asking about the progress of applications. And in the meantime, really, it's just kind of, again, what Annie was saying earlier on, getting back to basics. So thinking about the training that you offer, CQC said that there was a clear need for training as a result of their findings, and that's for all staff within an organisation. This should not just be regarded as a management issue. So yeah, get back to basics, think about your service culture, having a good service culture that's based on our core social care principles, so dignity, choice, control, empowerment, and making sure that as services we show zero tolerance in result to breaches of those core principles. And also, again, I feel as though I'm underlining an awful lot of what Annie said earlier on. Yeah, an application is basic MCA principles, and especially I think from what we're talking about today, the 5th key principle, using the least restrictive option. So in the last webinar, sorry, I did talk about Adil. Let me introduce you to him. So Adil was a young man with learning disabilities who was supported by an ARC member in a residential care service. He'd been unwell. He'd been to the doctors where he'd had a diagnosis of diabetes, and he reassured the GP, the diabetes nurse specialist. He understood what was going on. He was perfectly happy and able to manage his own condition. And then he went back to his home, and when he got home, a member of staff went through to the kitchen to find him helping himself to his usual 5 spoonfuls of sugar in his tea. So I think, again, the advice that we would be giving to our members in that sort of area is that application of the 5 key principles, carry on involving Adil, assume his capacity, apply the 1st key principle, assume his capacity. 2nd key principle, what support do we need to put in place? Look at the communication that we have in Adil. Has he really understood what's going on? Does he really understand the condition? Does he really understand the possible outcomes of that? If he does, then fine, we apply the 3rd key principle. This could be an unwise decision. However, if we decide that he does have capacity, then we're into the realm of the fourth key principle, acting in his best interests. And when we do that, we also apply the fifth key principle, using the least restrictive option. Can we support a deal to empower him, despite the fact that we've seen that he lacks capacity? We need to continue involving him to the fullest possible extent. What can a deal do in terms of research about support groups that are out there, exercise regimes, dietary options for him? So yeah, whatever we can put in place to empower a deal. At the end of the day, staff do have to realise that if he has capacity, it is his choice. And sometimes I think you need to reassure staff that does not run contrary to their duty of care. So yeah, back to the basics, keep it simple, apply the 5 key principles. The second thing I wanted to talk about was how providers manage their relationships with the supervisory body. CQC, again in their report, talk about a lack of communication, poor quality of capacity assessments and DoLS applications. So ARC's advice would be establish a good partnership with your supervisory body, review your relationship with the supervisory body. Do you actually have one in the first place? And then how do you manage that? So think about having broad conversations with people about numbers of applications, the quality of your applications, status of authorisations. Talk to them about how you can jointly manage prioritisation, explain any concerns you have about prioritisation. I'll come back to that in just a moment, and try to understand their needs. Annie said you can't do their job, but you can try and understand their needs, and they can try and understand yours. Explain your needs to them. Ask what you can do to help with the issues that they have, and be proactive with the supervisory body. And as a side note, I also think, you know, the idea of some co-produced training with the supervisory body has a lot of strength to it. Final concern I wanted to flag up was about whether learning providers should be concerned by the finding in the CQC report that their clients, that people with learning disabilities, might be being overlooked by supervisory bodies who are using the ADAS prioritisation tool. Well, I'm wondering for myself what that says about the tool. And having looked at it to my eye, it's not difficult to interpret the criteria as being more about protecting the supervisory body than is the supported person. Might be being a little controversial there. So, for example, the first 2 factors in establishing a higher priority talked about active objections on behalf of the person, meaningful attempts to leave. From a learning disability perspective, the worry is that the learned compliance that's experienced by so many people with learning disabilities can be a really strong feature for many people with learning disabilities and might keep them down in the mix. I'd be interested in other panelists' perspectives on why they think that people with learning disabilities may be being overlooked in the prioritisation processes. One more slide to share with you. So just to flag it up, as I said already, CQC identified clear training needs throughout social care for all staff. As I said, this should not just be regarded as a management issue. They cited specific concerns about providers having put training on hold while waiting for the transition to LPS that never happened. And they pointed out, and I'm just going to quote this, it's vitally important that services ensure staff have adequate knowledge of DoLS to protect people's human rights, both now and in the future. The training that we offer covers everything I've already talked about and much, much more as well, of course, and at all those levels that CQC states. So apologies for finishing on the shameless plug there, but that is me done now, Toby. Thank you.
Thanks, Rod. That's fine. So if I could invite all our panelists to bring themselves onto the main screen. So Michelle, Neil, Annie, and Liz. Where's Michelle gone? There we go. Thank you all for your presentations, and I'm going to go to Liz in a minute around questions, but we have had some questions in advance, and it perhaps relates to what you were just saying, Rod, about the triage tool. So several people have sent us questions in advance about what can they do? What practical things can they do to deal with delays in having applications authorised or not, as the case may be? And before we started the webinar, just having a brief conversation with Annie about that triage tool, and I was wondering whether an adapted version of it might be helpful for some providers, so providers can think through who do we need to reprioritise, who do we feel is is highest priority in terms of deprivation of liberty, if you can put it in those terms. So I'm just want to throw it open to all of you, all the panelists, about could the triage tool be used in that way, or have you got other advice, practical tips that you could share with our audience around dealing with situations where there are real delays in applications? Who would like to venture forth with a response?
Maybe I'll make a start, and I want
Thanks,
to follow. Yeah, I want to follow up on one very interesting comment Rod made. Having sit as a manager, as a local authority DoLS manager, quite a few times, I do think the prioritization tool is useful in practice, because at the end of the day, we all know the reason we are looking at LPS, there are too many applications. So somehow we have to think about a way of managing that. So at a practical level, I think it's useful. Secondly, I'm sorry, I'll rush through my slides rather quickly. If you look at some of the court cases, and especially the ombudsman reports, they're very critical of local authority using the tool, and therefore only ever assess the high priority. That would result in a lot of damages. It's not that you have a tool which is wrong, it's the fact that you never assess medium and low priority. So that's one thing I want to emphasize to you, where the criticism is, which means I like to go back to everything we discussed, really review. Once the local authority may have given you a priority, which we can all debate whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't mean that that case has to stay at that priority level forever. So your responsibility to keep reviewing it, and therefore, as Rod says, establish a good relationship with supervisory body, help yourself, help them, tell them it's change. That is really important. In my previous roles, I'll say two more very quick points. We did turn the prioritization tool as a simple tool for the managing authority, because it's quite helpful for them to think day to day, what does that mean, in order for the supervisory body to prioritize this particular case. I think it's really helpful if some providers want to think about that. Last point, which I really like about what Rod said about people learning disability almost showing disguised compliance. So if you're looking at only prioritizing those people who regularly objects, whatever that means, or makes attempts to leave, learning disabled people are going to lose out on this. And we had many debates in local authority. People with dementia seems to come up higher. I think the numbers are greater as well, which may explain the situation. I do agree with what Rod said. Again, my plea is to go back to MCA compliance, because we're not just looking at compliance, disguised compliance, real objection. We're looking at wishes and feelings of the person. So the learning disabled client may not be actively showing any objection or attempts to leave, but their wishes and feelings, which are looking, is much bigger than that. And you can highlight those particular issues in your application and trigger the supervisory body to prioritize. So one very last point is to make your application really individual to the person. So even if you have a tool or not, you have to say, okay, he's not making attempts to leave, using Rod's example, but actually these are his wishes and feelings. So really complete the form well. How the supervisory body chooses to choose your case is what you're telling them.
Great, thanks, Annie. That's a really comprehensive answer. But would other people like to come in here about practical examples they may have seen, or where managing authorities providers have been able to deal with delays? Any other thoughts? We've got a willing audience out there who want to
I think we share your pain. That's all I'm going to say on this. I do think that we are struggling to see various, local authorities resource-strapped, trying to do their best under the circumstances. And I think different areas probably vary a bit, between who can do more or less of these assessments in time. And it is a resource issue in many ways. So we bang up our heads against the wall, basically trying to ask for, a bit more speed and a bit more, quickness. It's a difficult one, and I'm really not sure, what the answer is, apart from a bit more money coming in at the top and being used more effectively. But I'm really not answering the question. I do know that, Toby, but I'm just saying how it feels.
Yeah, no, thanks, Neil. And I think there's that recognition here that it's an ideal situation, that it is a resource situation. It's not just that it's local authorities sitting around doing nothing, or poor applications which are not somehow getting properly looked at. So no, there's a genuine issue, and I'm just sorry that for our audience, where if other thoughts come up around how the delays can be managed, please do say so. Yeah, Liz, you wanted to come in here. You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the prioritisation thing is really helpful. The conversations we've had in previous webinars when thinking about, how can we think about avoiding, what good practice do we need to potentially not be in the situation where we've inevitably think we have got to go through the application. But I also think this is we have a challenge with the regulator at the moment, and I'm not entirely convinced that sometimes the inspection teams have a really good grasp of some of this. So I think being kind of feeling like you have got good expertise in your organisation, whether it's working in partnership with your local authority, whether it's supporting individual staff members who are, considering whether or not the application needs to be made, and helping our regulators to understand not to necessarily have a knee-jerk reaction sometimes. I think there are things that we can probably do, but that does mean that we need to feel confident in our understanding of the legislation and the process and the application. So maybe it's kind of feeling a bit braver, feeling that we do actually know our stuff, and together we can find ways to think about how the system can really support people, because it's all about people at the end of the day, isn't it? And we're all about people. So it's not very it's not a magic wand, but I just think we could feel, I think if we feel confident in the way that we're trying to understand and interpret the legislation, that will get us a bit further down the line.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Rod, you want to come in here, and then Annie again?
It's just to kind of to slightly expand on one of the points that I made during my presentation, which is I said something about sort of co-produced training between the supervisory body and providers. There's so much in that CQC report that talks about things like, just jotted a few things down: incorrect information coming from providers, inappropriate applications, the quality of assessments, capacity assessments being poor, people not updating information, making late applications. I think all of those things can be addressed if supervisory bodies and providers actually have the same training, so people can start to explore each other's perspectives, because we are all trying to achieve the same end here.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. I saw Annie nodding, and Annie's, you've got your hand up. So Annie, and then Neil. You're on mute, Annie.
Apologies. I'll just say something following on from what Liz said and also what Rod said. I really like Liz's point about providers gaining more confidence, which is really what all these webinars are about, being confident, focus on MCA compliance. And I think you can do so much more. As I want to demonstrate to you, DoLS is only one part of your continuum of good practice. I'm not saying we shouldn't ignore the fact we are unlawfully depriving a lot of people, but the positive practice is that wide. DoLS is here. So I really, really want to encourage you and want to pick up on Liz's point. Be more confident. Going back to Rod's point about building and developing relationship with supervisory body, I think working for the local authority, I can share with you, those statistics are always reported to every local authority safeguarding adults board. So if you can get as a providers forum onto a safeguarding adults board, membership or invites to participate, to have those conversations. Rod talks about co-produced training. Excellent. Any opportunity you can get onto a local providers forum that local authority organize from the commissioning department with all the care homes they commission in that area, have those regular communication. So not just building relationship with the local authority, the supervisory body itself, also the safeguarding board, also the providers forum, the local authority commissioning team, CQC, see it really as a much wider network strategy of working together.
Yeah, good point, Annie. And obviously reflecting what other people have said about that relationship with local authorities is so important. Neil, you want to come in again?
Yeah, it's just a little quick example. I had a client I worked with in a care home who whose behaviour got a little bit more challenging, and the DoLS came to an end because they were moved to another care home. And a few weeks later, I was visiting another client of mine in a different care home and noticed my chap. He was there sitting in the corner. I didn't know he'd been moved to this particular care home, but he hadn't been placed under adults or hadn't been even put under an urgent authorisation yet. And I had to sort of raise that with the managing authority. But he'd come from a home where he was restricted already. And there should have been a lot of information that got transferred. So it's either that there wasn't the information or there wasn't the questions being asked. And, it shouldn't always be for the outsider to come in and say something like this. And I'm not telling anybody off here, but it was an example that I think is a bit sobering, that, people can be in those situations when all the information is already understood. So I'd leave that one with you.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thank you. Yeah, that is sobering. Liz, have we had any questions posted? Are you on mute?
Yeah, sorry, my clicker didn't work. We've had one from Jacqueline who is asking about the advice. What is the advice following the application for DoLS being made and awaiting the authorisation? So I guess as a kind of, there's just a living with the reality of delay. So we might want to think about that. And then Kim says, don't feel, in relation to our discussion now, don't feel it's about confidence. We fill out quality application for DoLS and then went a long time for authorisation. Yeah, they've got one from May. So there's kind of, there is a theme here just about the practical impact of delay through the process. And, life goes on, doesn't it? So there's kind of living with the reality of delay. Wisdom on living with that reality.
And one of the questions that was asked in advance was about, is there any merit in sort of recording interventions or having some record of what's happening whilst there is that delay? I mean, they've actually said and planned for the interim to assure no unlawful deprivation, but I guess if the application has been made, then there's a deprivation and it's simply awaiting authorisation or not. But is there anything else that people can do to sort of, not exactly cover themselves, but at least give themselves some assurance that they are monitoring the situation. Yeah, Michelle, you want to come in here?
Yeah, it was just to say, obviously, it wasn't to kind. It's not really advice. Just to say, obviously, the delays with that for our role as IMCAs and as RPRs particularly, we only get the referral to support the person once the DoLS is in place. So once the DoLS is authorised, the referral comes to us, and then we can start working with the client. So it's delaying that side of things as well, because as advocates, our support isn't there for the person if the authorisation's not in place. So it's delaying that safeguard side of things as well.
And there's an irony there, isn't there, in a way? I mean, not that one would want the delays, but actually perhaps when people most need advocacy is in a period where they're being unlawfully deprived their liberty and don't have anybody to represent them. But I mean, that will be providing advocacy for a fault in the system, as it were. But yeah, Annie.
Yeah, what Michelle said made me think about, of course, she's right, unless the local authorities start assessing for DoLS, so 39A IMCA wouldn't be in place. But I think something positive we can all do, and I'm repeating everything in the slides, but I want to break it down into concrete examples. Back to that prioritization tool. If that person you applied for DoLS does not have any family or friends to support them, put it as urgent. If I'm a DoLS manager, I'll definitely prioritize that one, because where the protective factors, nobody's going in. So you can highlight the fact there's no appropriate representation. Hopefully they will prioritize. Michelle and Neil will get involved, and they will keep badgering the local authority. So that's really one good thing. If they have a family representative, you won't be doing that. You should tell the family representative that there's an unlawful deprivation of liberty. Now, local authority wouldn't thank me for that, but I always believe in being very transparent with the local authority. So as a care provider, you should be telling the husband, actually, we've applied for DoLS, but there are no safeguards at the moment. And I really thank you for coming in all the time. So the more you inform the people who should be informed and involve other people, the more protection from liability you will get.
Yeah, good point. I can hear a lot of local councillors suddenly getting messages from partners and family members of someone who is being unlawfully deprived, and then those always come back to the officers of the council. But it's important. It's a human right, so something action has to be taken. Rod, over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back sorry to keep repeating myself, but back to stuff I said in the presentation earlier on, which is, in terms just from a provider point of view, don't delay applications, keep submitting applications, keep chasing authorisations, keep a paper trail of that as well, is what we tell our members. So make sure you keep your email chain, record any phone calls that you've made to the supervisory body and exactly what they said, so you are covering yourself as much as possible. But also just think again back to those sort of basic principles, basic social care principles, the first three key principles of the Mental Capacity Act. Act preventatively. Let's not get to the position where DoLS applications are actually needed at all. If we're really thinking very strongly about the second key principle, resourcing people so they can come to their own decisions, can be put in a position where they're making their own decisions, we don't even have to start worrying about DoLS. So I would just be really wanting to emphasise that as well.
Thanks, Rod. Neil?
And just, if you are concerned about somebody being at risk because they might wander off, get under a truck on the road or something, that's a real hazard. It's a real thing, and you need to be very concerned, and you need to consider whether you would put in a safeguarding. I think that might help focus the local authorities' attention on what's really needed here, and they are going to look into what the best protective measures would be. So if they're not listening to you and you are very concerned, I would push that button as well, if nothing else, because it will bring attention to the situation if somebody is at risk. Obviously, not everybody's going to be at risk, but we've had loads of people that go AWOL and need to be brought back. And that's usually the time when people are very concerned about their safety. So, you know, think about that.
So raising a safeguarding concern, yeah, and I can see Annie nodding as well. Liz, are there other questions that are coming in?
Yeah, there's a couple. Well, there's some observations. So actually talking about people who are unbefriended, somebody's made the observation that the ADAS triage tool always highlights those as a high priority in their particular patch within their safeguarding. And an interesting comment from somebody, anonymous user: I work with clients who have brain injury. All of our clients in the community, most living in their own homes. As an organisation, we applied for DoLS for a number of clients many years ago. There was no response from a number of different LAs. We were then awaiting the LPS introduction. Since for most of the clients, prioritisation won't have changed, should we be seeking to make a new application on behalf of for those clients, since it has been so long since their original application?
And that echoes a question that was sent in advance about are DoLS applicable in, they said, domiciliary setup. So I'm assuming that means people living in their own homes rather than care homes or hospitals. And I think it was something you touched on, Neil, wasn't it, in terms of the role of the IMCA, about sometimes supporting and representing people in those situations. So do you want to comment?
Yeah, we a lot of people are under a DoLS in the community. It's a different process. If somebody's seen, you know, in a supported living environment, for example, or in shared lives, or, you know, it's adult fostering, in situations where they are having care provided for them in a location in the community, but it's not a hospital or a care home, there it's still the rules of deprivation liberty safeguards apply, and the Court of Protection is the sort of supervisory body in this case. So these matters need to go to the Court of Protection. A local authority will be involved in helping that process to happen, but it's signed off by the Court of Protection in court, and it's supposed to be renewed or reviewed every year. There's a huge backlog. It's just like, you know, no one's got this right yet. So the local authorities are struggling with their backlog. The court are struggling with theirs, you know, and it's difficult. But, you know, if there's a deprivation of liberty happening in the community, it's illegal and it still needs to be justified, if you like, by the court. So we act as Rule 1.2 reps, which is a similar role to the paid relevant persons representative under the sort of normal DoLS, and we do the same sort of job with that person in the community, not in the care home, and that's simply the difference. But yeah, it's out there, and I think, you know, it shows how the law applies to everybody, but we think we're just in a silo when it becomes, you know, it's all about our care home or our hospital setting, but this is wider than that. So, you know, it might be of interest to some of you. It might not be for everybody.
Well, it's really important because, of course, the famous Supreme Court case in 2014 involved people who were living in supported living. They weren't living in a care home or a hospital. So it was, yeah, in that sense, it was a real reminder that here are people who are affected by deprivations or liberty, who are outside more institutional settings. Yeah, Annie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to respond to the question Liz read out. If you are a provider working with people with acquired brain injury, and they definitely would come under DoLS if they lack capacity to be accommodated and cared for where they are, and you've made an application years ago or 1 year ago, however long ago, I would definitely advise raising it with the supervisory body again, if you haven't had a response. Sadly, everything you said is true, i.e., there's a waiting list for community DoLS, not just for local authority, but also for the Court of Protection. So the local authority, from where I sat before, uses very similar prioritization tools, because the law about deprivation of liberty is exactly the same, whether you're in care home, hospital, supported living, any kind of setting. It's only the process which is different. How you define deprivation of liberty, what your responsibility as a provider is exactly the same. So everything we discuss, you need to think about MCA compliance, but I'll definitely trigger it again.
Thanks, Annie. Other questions, Liz, that have come in? Or
No, that's it so far.
okay.
I think.
We're getting close to the end of the webinar, so we don't, if people do have more questions, please do throw them in. But I noticed one slightly controversial question here. Oh, Annie, sorry, yeah, you want to say something else? Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I forgot to say that, because Toby, you did pass me the question about do deprivation of liberty safeguards applying domiciliary care from the previous webinar. I think it's slightly different from what Neil and I have been talking about, i.e. you're being accommodated in a different setting. So you're provided 24/7 care in a different care setting other than the care home. I take it the question about domiciliary care is, I may be wrong, one of your providers is going in to provide domiciliary care. Do we need to apply for those? I would think it's very unlikely then that a domiciliary care provider would be applying for those, because deprivation has to be for a non-negligible period of time. So you're only going in once a week, twice a week. It's not your duty to apply. However, if you're a domiciliary care provider and you're going into somebody's own home, i.e. the husband locks the wife up when he goes shopping, you should be raising the question of deprivation of liberty or even safeguarding. So just want to answer that particular question.
And Annie, just coming back on about that, I mean, lots of domiciliary care providers, particularly staff who are doing that kind of work, won't necessarily be familiar at all with DoLS, and so they in that situation, they see the situation described of someone being locked up whilst the partner goes shopping. Who should the that care worker report that to? Who should their manager in the first instance? Would you say that they're concerned about the situation? Yeah.
Well, I think every organisation should have a safeguarding policy and mental capacity policy. So I think, yes, very wise to discuss it with your manager, your supervisor before you take any actions. But in terms of responsibility, I would say you'll go to a local authority, because the local authority either funds that care package, the domiciliary care package, and even if they don't fund, and it's a private funding arrangement, once a local authority knows about deprivation of liberty from anyone, regardless of the funding, they become responsible. Yeah. So again, probably local authorities would not thank me for that, but ultimately it's back to a local authority.
Yeah, and you'd hope in that situation that it would be handled obviously sensitively, because that situation may arise because the partner who has capacity is absolutely desperate. They don't know any other way of dealing with the situation, or they're concerned that their husband, partner, spouse, wife is going to walk out and obviously get knocked over. So in a way, it's a desperate situation, and that whilst it may look like a safeguarding issue in many respects, you'd hope that it would be handled sensitively and people would sit down and explore what the best option is for supporting that person. Yeah,
I think especially in self-funding situations, a lot of people don't know. We don't expect domiciliary care providers to know the law. We don't expect families to know the law. But once it becomes imputable to the state, what the law says, the local authority knows about it. They have a duty to carry out carers assessment, to look at any other signposting. So look at it as a positive process, as we always say.
Somebody asked in advance about they were seeing an increase in DoLS being used for people under the age of 18. Does that chime with any of our panel members? Is that a trend that you've observed? Don't need to comment if you haven't observed anything.
I'll come in. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's me again.
okay.
But please, definitely from a local authority point of view, we do. I think the build up to LPS made a lot of transition teams and under 18 teams in local authority aware of younger people under deprivation of liberty. And everybody was thinking about LPS, which will come in covering 16 and onwards and even below because of case law. So we're going to repeat ourselves again, which is the law is the same. So if you are under 18, age 16 comes in when MCA applies. But the DoLS case law have had cases where deprivation of liberty is concluded by the court for as young as 11. And parents do not have the responsibility to authorize, to make those best interest decisions. So sadly, that is the same. So I think, yes, the preparation of LPS have triggered a lot of awareness around that particular age.
Yeah. Thanks, Annie. Are there any other questions that have come in whilst we've been speaking, Liz? No. There was perhaps.
Hang on. And Rita says, as Dom Care, my organisation also provide 24/7 care day and night. We may have a client that cannot be left alone at all, as there may be harm to self. Is DoLS required? So we're talking live-in care here, I think. Is that what you're suggesting, Amrita? Live-in care, and they've got a client who they're supporting with live-in care who cannot be left alone, as they may be harm. They face a risk of harm to themselves.
So they've got a living carer in their own home.
Yeah. Is a DoLS required in that situation?
What does the panel think?
Yeah,
presumably, if the person lacks capacity, it's in their best interest, and they require that continuous control or supervision. Yeah, Michelle, you want to come in here?
It was just an example. I've got a client who sounds very similar. It's a younger gentleman. He does live at home with his mum, but they also have a 24-hour carer in place as well, and he's under a community DoLS, and I'm involved as his Rule 1.2 rep.
So it could be the case then. Right, thanks, Michelle. Annie?
Yeah, I noticed Neil also nodding his head. I think the answer you may not like is deprivation of liberty is the same for everyone. So if you know about it, yes, it applies. I'm just thinking, how can I be helpful? It is very unusual. I don't know whether the other panelists agree that in community DoLS, unlike care homes and hospitals, they are the managing authority and they have to apply for DoLS. In community DoLS, most of the applications are made by the local authority or the ICB, which is the commissioning of the continuing healthcare arrangements. So maybe the slight good news in this example is it's not up to the domiciliary provider who provides the sleeping care to apply. It's for them to make the local authority or the ICB fully aware this is what they believe to be deprivation of liberty. When you trigger it, you need to believe the person lacked capacity to consent to the arrangements, and what you're providing amount to deprivation of liberty under the asset test. So you don't need to make the application, but you need to make the local authority or the commissioner ICB fully aware.
Thank you, Annie. And I think on that note, we're going to draw the session to an end because it's almost 3:30. So firstly, I just wanted to say a few words. I'm sure Liz will want to say a few words as well. Is we're particularly for everyone who's attended, we're going to send out a feedback form to you. So the links to the Q&A, and it'll also be sent via email after the webinar finishes. It'll take a few minutes to get to you. Would really appreciate it if you could complete that, so we get an idea of what value you've and how useful you found the webinar. As I say, the session, as I said at the beginning, the session is recorded. So the recording of the presentations, the slides used, and this discussion will be available on the Care Provider Alliance website alongside the recordings from the 2 previous webinars. I mean, it seems almost a bit sad, really, because it's the end of the series now. So, and some Rod and Neil and Annie and Michelle have been on previous webinars. It's lovely to have Annie here today as well. So, I think sort of picking up some points from previous webinars, but were reiterated today, whilst there's lots of, I suppose, technical things one can think about to try and mitigate around delays and recording and keeping that paper trail and so on and so forth, are really important. I hope some of those things have been helpful to our audience. I think the other thing is to particularly think of the second webinar, and perhaps points that have been made today, is about thinking about the person who's there, who's in the care home or at home or in a hospital indeed. What are their needs? What's their situation? Can they be supported to make decisions? Is the care that's being provided, is it person-centered? Is it thinking about their needs? Is it the least restrictive option that's being provided? What decisions can they make? And even if the application has got in and there's a delay, then what can you still do to support that person to make as many decisions for themselves as possible, even if there are restrictions or potential deprivation on their liberty. So please do bear in mind that the webinar series has been constructed in terms of the DoLS within the context of the Mental Capacity Act and within the context of human rights, and also some of the resources that were prepared and have been referred to in preparation of liberty protection safeguards, which we are still indefinitely postponed. So do look at those links that have been shared today and at previous webinars as well, and I think you'll find them very useful. But really just want to finish up by thanking our panelists today, Michelle, Annie, Rod and Neil, and our panelists from previous webinars as well. Thank colleagues from both NCF, National Care Forum, and the Care Provider Alliance for supporting these webinars, and also all of you for attending them and asking questions both on the day and in advance. And I've learned a lot just listening to the panelists respond and present, so I've found it really beneficial as well. Perhaps the last word should go to you, Liz, before we say goodbye.
Oh, I'm not sure I feel equipped for the last word. Really just to echo your thanks, Toby. Our panelists have been brilliant, both today and previous webinars. I have to say I've learned a lot. I thought I knew my onions, but occasionally you get a question, you think, ooh, yeah, that's an interesting question. So thank you all. Thank you to our participants who've joined us. And yeah, the webinars will be available. So if you missed it or only got a bit of it or want to share them with your colleagues, check out the links. And thank you. And I don't think it's too early to say have a very Merry Christmas.
Or season's greetings as well. Yeah.
Yes. Festive
okay, well,
times.
thank you. Yeah, thanks, Liz. And thank you again to panelists. Thank you to our audience, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. And no, do look at the recordings when you have time. So we're going to sign off now, and we're going to be closing it down. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.